I'm in Pendleton, Indiana. This is the spot in 1843 that Frederick Douglass came to speak on the issue of slavery. He was 25 at the time. He was born into a slave family in Maryland. He would eventually find his freedom, and he would travel the country talking about slavery. And he was invited here to Pendleton to speak at a friend's meeting house. Word got out that he was coming, and a mob had formed. And they were going to stop Frederick Douglass from speaking. So they came here to interrupt the speech. There was a platform built on this area. And just as Frederick Douglass began to speak, about 30 white men with stones and bats started to interrupt the speech. Frederick Douglass was hurt. He was hit by a rock and was rendered unconscious. He was helped to his feet by some gentlemen, and he was taken to a home about 3 miles east of here, which would be in that direction. The gentleman's name was Neil Hardy. He was taken there to be treated for his wounds. Unfortunately, the men that caused the trouble were not prosecuted. Frederick Douglass was severely injured, survived, and obviously spent the rest of his life talking about slavery. Here in Pendleton, they have erected monuments, or these are plaques about what happened here. So I'll just kind of read it. In 1843, Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society sent speakers to New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana to hold 100 conventions on abolition. When speakers encountered citizens with deeply held racist ideas, they were often targets of violence. September 16th, 1843, a crowd gathered near here to listen to George Bradburn, William White, and Frederick Douglass. During Bradburn's speech, more than 30 men marched in, armed with stones and brickbats, and demanded that the speakers leave. In the assault that followed, White, Douglass, and others were injured. Local supporters defended them and carried them to safety. Douglass spoke the next day at nearby friend's meeting house without incident. Rioters went unpunished. This is at the what's known now as Falls Park in Pendleton. It's on the registry of the National Historical Society. In his biography, he said he blamed no one but society for what happened here. So I'm going to go to the Friends Meeting House where he would speak the following day, and then go to the Friends Cemetery where Mr. Hardy is buried. That is the gentleman who owned the home that Frederick Douglass was taken to after he was injured here. Okay, I am at the Friends Meeting House. We're about 3 miles east of Falls Park, where the mob turned against Frederick Douglass and injured him. And he was taken to a home not far from here of Neil Hardy. But the following day, Frederick Douglass came to this piece of property, 1843, and spoke at the Friends Meeting House. Now back then, it was a log structure, and the current structure was built in the 1850s and has been renovated a few times since then, I'm sure. But this is the site of the log cabin that Frederick Douglass spoke against slavery. The Friends meeting place, Society of Friends, also known as Quakers, were very much against slavery. So this is the site in 1843 that Frederick Douglass spoke to a group of the Society of Friends, known now also as the Quakers. So this is on a Sunday, and as I drove up, there were cars. So I'm sure they are meeting now for worship. This place is also on the National Historical Society registry. And because I am a channel devoted towards cemeteries, I will also walk through this cemetery for a minute. But I will make my way up to the old cemetery. See if I can't find the grave of Mr. Hardy, whose home Frederick Douglass was taken to, because he is said to be buried in the old cemetery. This is the old cemetery to the Friends Meeting House in Pendleton, Indiana. Among these graves are Neil and Elizabeth Hardy, whose home Frederick Douglass was taken to after he was attacked at Falls Park, 1843. Unfortunately, I was not able to locate their graves because these stones are very weathered and most are unreadable. Okay, so with the help of a gentleman that came out of the meeting, we were able to locate the graves of Neil and Elizabeth Hardy. Neil is on the left, Elizabeth is on the right. It is at their home in 1843 that Frederick Douglass was taken to after his injuries. So this is again at the Friends Meeting House, known as the Quakers. And we are in Pendleton, Indiana. And he also told me that the founder of this particular meeting house is buried just right here. Jonathan Thomas. He died in 1839, so this would have been before the events at the park where Frederick Douglass was injured. But this is the founder of the home, of the meeting house. This is the newer structure built in the 1850s, remodeled a few times. The Quakers. The Quakers did not believe in slavery, obviously. So that's why Frederick Douglass came here to this piece of property and spoke. On this site, though, he spoke in a log structure, which would have probably been on the site of the modern structure. Frederick Douglass would return to Madison County, Indiana in February of 1893. This is the site of the old fairgrounds where he came to speak in front of a large group of people. He would talk of the incident that happened in Pendleton 50 years earlier. And he said he didn't blame anyone but society and for the hatred of black people. Frederick Douglass would die 2 years later in 1895.